So Moana 2, this is the sequel, of course, to Moana, which came out in 2016, one of the biggest and I dare say best Disney films that came out in the 2010s.
Yeah.
And in that time, in the 7 or 8 years since that movie's come out, Moana, which performed really well at the box office, made, I think, north of $650 million globally. Definitely a huge success,
Mhm.
especially considering that time Walt Disney Animation was sort of in a rebuild phase. They were having somewhat of a new renaissance after having a bit of a difficult period in the early 2000s. That movie did a lot to help them sort of regain their status as, the preeminent animation studio in Hollywood. But in that time frame, since 2016, Moana has become an even bigger sensation. It's gone on to be even more of a global pop culture phenomenon. Obviously, the merchandising has been ridiculous for Moana. It's been made its debut on Disney Plus, and it's become, I think, literally the most streamed movie of all time. There's a ridiculous stat out there. I think it's been streamed like, I don't know, for more than 1 billion hours, or I might be vastly undershooting it, just like
My
billions and
God.
billions of hours of streaming because of the replayability of the movie, the
Yeah.
very, very resonant replayability of the songs. It's just gone on to sort of create a new life of its own. And so, Moana, in terms of a follow up, was always going to have a follow up, but initially, Moana 2, or whatever it was intended to be titled initially, was going to be a Disney Plus exclusive. It was going to be a television show. That's what it was
Mhm.
initially announced as back in December 2020. This was all the way back at the Disney Investor Day. I believe we might have even talked about it in reaction on the podcast that they were
Mhm.
going to make a follow up series. And this was under different leadership at the time. They were very much focused on Disney Plus and streaming titles, streaming exclusive titles. But then, of course, the return of Bob Iger a couple of years ago at Disney and the ousting of Bob Chapek has brought in some new seat changes. And Bob Iger and I'm sure the studio heads and probably even the filmmakers behind this, they all sort of came together to agree that they were going to refashion the television series into a proper theatrical sequel that was going to have a big rollout in theaters. And that happened midway during production. It was not intended to be that way, but they made that decision midway during production. And so this movie has come out in theaters. And of course, we have to talk about the box office just because of the ridiculous, just smash records of the numbers that it's doing. But we're going to talk about the movie and our thoughts and what we overall walked away from with Moana 2. And so, with all of that out the way, man, I will pass it to you. What were your thoughts on this new Disney film, Moana 2?
Yeah, man, you had a good preface there where Moana 2 just went through some interesting changes from at one point maybe being a TV show, and then Bob Iger comes and it's like, hey, yo, no, we need to get back to the movies, and which does make a ton of sense. Again, Moana 1 does come from that weird Disney Renaissance. They were cooking Big Hero 6, Zootopia, Frozen, Tink, like they really were just eating. And Moana was definitely part of that ilk, and so I think initially, if Moana 2 was originally, I think, announced, and you told me it was going to be a movie, I'd be like, that makes a ton of sense. Let's do it. Let's go in and get it done. I think there is a chance for it to maybe be good. But when you come in and tell me Moana 2, one, is not going to have Lin-Manuel Miranda part of the project anymore. It used to be a TV show. Now they got to kind of mold it to fit a theatrical experience. Now I have a different expectation of what this movie is and is supposed to be, and my excitement level definitely goes down. And after watching the film, I feel like I definitely feel like my expectation level was accurate after knowing all those things. I think I still wanted to see it, right? I still love animation. Moana 1 is still a banger, but Moana 2 comes in and it unfortunately doesn't do anything new, really. And it really is Moana 1 remixed with very small things. They add in some side characters here and there. They try to change some of the weird DNA of what the villain is and what the ending is, and all of it, to be honest, just simply doesn't work. What does work, I'm gonna start with the good, is I think the animation in this film is fantastic. I think it looks really good. I think the movie's actually quite beautiful. There's a lot of moments I was like, that's some good animation right there. That looks fantastic. This looks really good. But what is animation without a story? And the story just simply is not there. They tried to add in these side characters that are meaningless and dumb. They are just kind of there for no reason. Again, the story is they do copy paste without adding anything really new. The music isn't all the way there, though. I've seen some other people talk about the music. I don't hate it as much as a lot of other people hate. There is a really good song in there. I actually don't know what it's called, but Moana sings it like two times, I think. I was like, wait, I actually really like that song. That's a good song. But because the movie and the story isn't as good, the songs aren't gonna feel as good either. The stakes feel higher than ever, but they don't feel like I should care either. They don't give me a reason to care, and this movie is trying to do far too many things at once. It's too distracting while absolutely meaning nothing all at the same time, and I can feel everything in those beats. I can feel that it used to be or that it was trying to be a TV show. I can feel the absence of Lin-Manuel Miranda. I can feel all of these new characters that mean absolutely nothing, just fluffing the movie for no reason. But Aioli Cravalho works, The Rock still works. They, whenever they're on screen together, it is still fine. But unfortunately, it doesn't make for a good movie. It's just something that probably shouldn't have happened. It really feels like those old Disney sequels that used to go straight to VHS, right? Like Mulan 2, not a very good movie, but it feels like that in a lot of different ways. Of like, there's a couple moments you're like, what's going on here? Why is this happening? And Moana 2 feels like a lot of that to me. So it's unfortunate, but I can't say I didn't see it coming either.
What's also interesting to note about Moana 2 is the fact that the initial directors from the previous film did not return, John Musker and Ron Clements, who are Disney legends in their own right. They
Mm-hmm.
directed a lot of the Disney classics of the 90s Renaissance, The Little Mermaid and Aladdin, Hercules. They did The Princess and the Frog. So they were veterans and they knew that world. They knew the company culture and the system, and they were responsible for a lot of their huge hits. And
Mm-hmm.
then on top of the fact Lin-Manuel Miranda does not return. And I would argue Lin-Manuel Miranda might be the most important songwriter in a mass commercial pop culture sense of the 2010s. He might be
Yeah,
the
I
most
think you're
important
right.
just because of his work and what he's contributed to, and the fact that, yes, his music resonates, and his music has largely been responsible for the ridiculous streaming numbers that we see, because he also wrote Encanto, and that's been a huge success
Mm-hmm.
as well. And knowing that they weren't going to come back, coupled with the fact that this was fashioned as a TV show initially, already gave me plenty of reasons to be concerned. And unsurprisingly, Moana 2 was not a good movie. And as I watched the film, it reminded me of that Disney era that I thought was over, that you just mentioned. In the 90s and 2000s, Disney Animation, they used to commonly release all of those sequels to their beloved animated feature films. There's dozens and dozens of them.
There's
I
a
think
lot.
more than people realize. The
Yeah.
Return of Jafar, The Lion
Mm-hmm.
King 2, Simba's Pride. There's like 3 Beauty and the Beast sequels, so on and so forth. There's a lot of them. But those sequels would always be released direct to video, such as VHS and DVD. They never came out in theaters. And they never came out in theaters because, one, they weren't really canonized with the official lineup of Walt Disney animated feature films.
Mm-hmm.
And two, most of them are garbage. They suck. They're not
Mm-hmm.
good movies. Moana 2 is the equivalent of a direct to video sequel that tries to do a follow up that's much lesser than a far superior original film that came out 8 years ago. The story isn't as compelling. The music is nowhere near as memorable, and none of the emotional beats landed at all. I think my big problem with this film as I was watching it was the fact that I could tell it was a TV show. The
Mm-hmm.
story meanders around for such a long time before anything meaningful happens. It's just something that just plots along in the essence of what a TV show is supposed to do. TV shows typically build and build and build. You tell your story over the course of a serialized, sort of episodic tale. And maybe nothing really of consequence happens for a few episodes, but we're kind of okay with that because we know that there's more to come.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do that in a movie. It's not going to be successful. And the story just meandered so long here. And it's so odd because Moana 2, it's a short film. It's a brisk 100 minutes, but it felt long. It drags
Yeah.
on and on. And that's just attributed to the weird execution of the pacing. The pacing is all wrong. The runtime really has nothing to do with it. If your pacing isn't well, if you don't
Mm-hmm.
have a well-paced story, then it's going to go off the rails. And this is just not as well paced as that original movie was. That first one just moves at just such a great pace. It feels good. You're in and out, and you get everything you need in a very, very satisfying experience. And I'm also curious to know, to move towards the musical side of things.
Yeah.
because you do have new musical artists coming here to contribute, who have been somewhat successful in their own right. But I do wonder, was the show as it was fashioned, was that going to be a musical? We don't know the answer to that
Mm.
question. Or did they have to add in music when they decided to sort of stitch this footage together and recontextualize it as a theatrical feature film? I
Mhm.
wonder what that answer is, because I do think that the music does not feel like it was written in tandem with the story. The music
Yeah.
feels disconnected from the story to me. And not only that, none of this is going to be memorable. I don't think any of it's going to carry like any of those original songs did.
Mhm.
Some of them might be okay, but that first one is such a phenomenon, and that's why it's so
Yeah.
successful, because of that music. And again, you go back to those Disney sequels that went to VHS and DVD, they largely had music as well, but you don't remember any of those songs. We're not singing any of that stuff. We're singing the original tracks that became legendary, that became iconic.
Mhm.
There's a lot of just pointless characters, which the directors sort of alluded to the fact that this was going to be more of an ensemble TV show, but when they decided to change it to a movie, they refocused on Moana. And so you can clearly see, like, hey, we have a lot of characters here and we're doing nothing with them and they're not important. And that was distracting because it's a lot of new people. And it's like, well, what are they really here for? They're not adding anything to the story. That's just like one of those consequences of the changes that they made. Like, they just have
Mhm.
these characters that they can't really utilize because Moana has to be the centerpiece. And I even think, behind the scenes from a vocal performance, The Rock, he didn't do it for me in this movie. He sounds a lot less
Mhm.
energized and enthusiastic this time around. Of course, I
Mhm.
rewatched the first one before watching this one, and you could just feel the energy.
Yeah.
You can feel that performance really shine through. He was really terrific in that
Yeah, he
first
was.
movie. Here, he sounds tired. He sounds like he got 10 other things that he's probably doing. It's probably recording these lines at 4 in the morning. The
Mhm.
musical performance that he has, it's like a forced rendition of You're Welcome, but just much less great than that.
Mhm. Yeah.
He doesn't sound like he's all the way there in this movie. I was very taken aback by that. I'm like, and maybe it's age, like he is older, like that also can be a factor. We have to,
Mhm.
acknowledge that he's in his almost mid 50s. But he just sounded a lot less lively in this movie, and I very much noticed that watching the film. Last thing I'll just say, listen, them changing this to a movie, I am 1000% behind that decision. Unfortunately, they could not initially greenlight this as a proper sequel from the get-go, which they should have
Yeah.
just always done. It should have just been a
Exactly.
movie from day one. Of
Exactly.
course, a different administration made that decision. Not a good
Mhm.
decision, but you live with that decision and then you change course. I'm 1000% behind the decision to change course, because we're seeing financially that is the wise, responsible decision to do. You don't put this on streaming when you can make all this money that they are making.
Absolutely.
So I'm
Mhm.
totally for that. However, there's going to be consequences. You have to deal with the fact that it's probably going to feel fragmented. It's not going to be memorable. This wasn't the intention creatively to make it this way. So now you're trying to backfill and you're trying to, fit a square peg into a round hole. And that's just not always going to work. It's a very, very difficult task. So I know they had a lot of work to make this happen. And I don't know when the decision was made. We only found out about this year. It wasn't like
Right.
we even knew this a year ago. So it's a tough position to be put in, but ultimately it results in a very, very, I think, bad movie. It's just not a good movie at all and pretty forgettable if you ask me. But considering all of that, it's a box office behemoth nonetheless. And I think a lot of that is because of the strength, really, of the reputation of the original film. And, I do want to talk quickly just about the box office, because we did like make predictions and talk about this a couple of weeks ago. But as we expected, this broke all the records, over the Thanksgiving 5-day holiday weekend. It cemented a new Thanksgiving box office record and accumulated over $221 million over the 5-day holiday weekend, which completely obliterates the previous record holder, another Disney feature film, 2019's Frozen 2, which came in at 125 million. And the second or the third place entry after that is 2013's Hunger Games: Catching Fire, which brought in $109 million during its Thanksgiving opening weekend. It also just stands as the biggest 5-day debut in history, full stop,
Mm.
period, overtaking Universal 2023, The Super Mario Brothers, and collectively Moana 2, Wicked, and Gladiator 2, which Wicked and Gladiator 2, of course, came out pre-Thanksgiving. Moana drops Thanksgiving. Together, the trio, this trio of big budget blockbusters, are responsible for the biggest Thanksgiving on record so far, and overall accumulated $422 million collectively over the 5-day holiday weekend. Wicked brought in $117 million. Gladiator brought in $44 million. And it shattered the previous benchmark, which was 2018's Thanksgiving holiday weekend, which was the trio of Ralph Breaks the Internet, another Disney feature film, Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald, and Creed 2, which all collectively brought in $315 million. And according to reports, more than 30 million people in the United States this past weekend went to a movie theater to see one of these movies. So collectively, resounding success across the board for all three of these films, but in particular, Moana 2, $221 million over 5 days. It's ridiculous. It's well over what we thought and predicted. I think we set it at 145 or something like that, and that's just domestic. Right now, it's already closing in on 400 million worldwide, and it's just going to carry and carry furthermore after that. So, thoughts, reactions to just these huge, massive numbers and what this movie's doing right now?
God damn, that's my reaction. That is a lot of money that Moana is racking in. I knew it would be something crazy. But 221 in 5 days domestic is insane. Like, that's just crazy to me. But yeah, I think, you know, I knew Thanksgiving, I knew Moana, I had a feeling Moana was going to be something crazy. I had a feeling Wicked was going to be something crazy. So although just a little wild, I'm like, hey, there's a lot of money. I'm not surprised at all, man. This is just a wild, crazy weekend. And looking at these three movies, I think I can understand for sure. Of course, there's other factors, but I think these three movies are easily looked at as having more anticipation than Ralph Breaks the Internet, Crimes of Grindelwald, and Creed 2. It just makes a ton of sense that they would beat these three, would beat those three. And what's also really interesting to me is how quickly the Super Mario Brothers movie was beat. You know, that record got set last year. Here we are 1 year later, already breaking that record again with Moana. I think that's really interesting how that happened back to back so quickly. I feel like in my mind, a lot of times you have a record like that, it's going to take a little bit. Nope. They were like, oh, here's the next year. And it gets broken pretty quickly. So, man, I think it all makes sense. But yeah, Moana's finna hit that Billy, bro. It just is what it is. And I'm interested to see what number it can get to, though.
Oh yeah, that's inevitable. It's just a matter of when and not if. And yeah, it's just good. It's good news. It's good news to see people back at the movies. I've had a lot of people talk to me about one or all three of these movies, which is always like fun and great because people are going out to see them. They're like, no, I'm going to get up and I'm going to go. I'm going to see Wicked. I'm going to see Gladiator. I'm going to see Moana. They all have mass appeal. These are three huge titles that have pre-baked in audiences. All of these come from something else. That's why they're doing so well. And in the case of Moana, especially, again, it is on the heels of one of the most successful streaming titles that we've seen so far. And so this was always destined to be this way. Again, support the decision to put it into theaters and make it a movie. Like, of course, this is why you do that. You cannot achieve this level of cultural relevancy in a streaming title. You just cannot. That's why you put movies in theaters, to make this type of money if they have that upside, if you have that potential to go that far. And it's paying dividends, obviously, for Disney. And so this will carry them really, really far. It's going to be one of the highest grossing movies of the year, if not the highest grossing movie of the year. It has a long way to go to catch Inside Out 2, but it's in the purview. It's possible. It's definitely possible with just how it's pacing right now. And then, of course, Wicked doing what it's doing, like we talked about in the recent review of that. It had a better Friday over the Thanksgiving weekend than it did at its opening Friday weekend. So that just speaks to how many people are going to see that movie. And Gladiator 2 doing very, very strong business, especially overseas, internationally. Lots of people are checking that film out as well. So great time to go to the movies, great options available. So folks, those are all of our thoughts on Disney's Moana 2. If you've checked this movie out this past weekend, hit us up and let us know what you think.